Hi, everybody.
Hello.
How's it going today? I can't hear
Yeah, there's sort of no point.
you. Welcome back to Writing Fiction Across the Void. Hi, I'm Kevin Vibert.
I'm Sophie Takagi Kaner.
And we're going to talk about a bunch of things today. You may have noticed that our titles are a little bit vague, and that's because we have a bunch of different topics that are all kind of interconnected that we're going to get into today. But before we do that, we have some business from last time to talk about.
We do, but even before that, we should probably say, sounds like I'm very loud, you're very soft.
I'm very soft. Okay, let's try this.
Fun. I'll just sort of keep yelling like I do. Okay, so make sure that you are all in the Discord is one thing that we should reestablish. I believe there's that link in the description.
Yep,
again.
should be a link in the episode description.
And so you can go into the live channel in the Discord, and that's what we'll be checking. And I also know that there's a fair amount of lag on the stream, but it is what it is.
Yeah, we're having some technical difficulties today. It's possible that it'll get a little start and stop at certain points, but we're going to do our best to keep this together.
Yeah, we'll just see. Okay. Yikes. I'm definitely hearing people say that they can barely hear you. Okay, I will back off a little bit.
Okay, now is my mic, not picking up at all?
What? We just get one?
That's funny.
When we tested it earlier, mine was inaudible.
I can actually even see. Okay, hang on one second.
Okay, please hold. Is it on? Yes.
Yes. All right. I can tell just from the readout that that's better. Okay. At least I think so, unless the readout's lying to me. We'll find out when the stream catches up with our real time 20 minutes from now.
If it doesn't get better, you can share mine.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. So we're going to get started by sharing a submission from last time,
Yeah.
I think, which I'm very excited about. So if you recall, and I know it's possible that some people are just joining us for the first time this time. So last time we talked about getting started, and we talked about a basic 5-point outline. It's not the only outline that you can use to write a story, but it is one that you can use. And we went over that, and we had everyone do an exercise where they at least write the outline and possibly also write a piece.
Yeah.
And I know that people worked in groups. Okay. Oh, sounds like your mic is working better now.
All right.
Okay. So we chose a submission that I really, really liked. I'm just checking to see who posted it to make sure that we give credit. Okay. So this was posted by Fox, Faye, and Jeremy. And I think that their group name was 3 Rats, 2 Cats. So we didn't make a slide for it, but I'm going to read you their 5-point outline, which we thought was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can talk about it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So here's their outline. Point 1, introduction. Avery King and Sylvester, their cat, have just moved into their new home. It is one hell of a fixer-upper. Drafty, fuses blow often, lots of creaking floorboards, rough, but not unlivable. Point 2, we have to do something. Faultiness of the house increases. Consistent drafts worsen. Doors seem to open and close themselves. Pictures won't stay on walls, and the sounds of creaking keep Avery up at night. When they do sleep, they dream of living in a large, meaty being with the wet, dark breathing. Sylvester goes missing. Avery begins to suspect a squatter. The person who sold them the place won't pick up the phone, so they change locks. Oh no, I dropped. That's no good. Do either of these mics work?
I don't know what's the deal. Mic is weird. Can't hear you. Mic just disconnected.
Does Kevin's work any better? Sorry.
Okay. Okay, someone says it's better.
It's back?
I think that the sound issues might actually just be connected to our internet connection.
Okay.
Unfortunately. So...
I'll start it again.
Yeah, start it again. And in the chat, just let us know if we're dropping out. I've done everything I can to make the connection more stable. But we just don't have very good internet for people who make their money on the internet. But
okay. So Kevin's is consistent but soft. Maybe I should just scream into Kevin's. I'm gonna try screaming into Kevin's, and hopefully this works. Oh, I can just talk into both of them at the same time. And then if at least one of them is working, hopefully you'll be able to hear me. Okay, so we're doing both. I love this. Okay, starting over again. Introduction. Avery King and Sylvester, their cat, have just moved into their new home. It is one hell of a fixer-upper. It's drafty, fuses blow often, lots of creaking floorboards. It's rough but not unlivable. 2, we have to do something. The faultiness of the house increases, consistent drafts worsen, doors seem to open and close themselves, pictures won't stay on walls, and the sounds of creaking keep Avery up at night. When they do sleep, they dream of living in a large, meaty being with the wet, dark breathing. Sylvester goes missing. Avery begins to suspect a squatter. The person who sold them the place won't pick up the phone. They change the locks and install security cameras. Point 3, the rope is a snake. When the security footage is sped up, it shows the walls moving. It shows the house breathing. This house, it's alive. I love that.
Yeah.
That totally got me when I got to that part. 4, the climax. Avery goes to the basement, opens the furnace. The inside of the furnace isn't metal, it's meat. It's organic and it's decaying. The house is dying. The flesh tunnel, that's disgusting. Somebody wrote flesh tunnel. This is cursed. Flesh tunnel goes deep into the ground, warm, rancid air coming from it. Avery sits next to the rotting furnace all night, binges home repair YouTube videos in a dissociative blur. They have nowhere else to go. The house has no one else to nurse it. 5, conclusion. Within days, the house is warm again. Creaky breathing never stops, but it becomes almost soothing. Avery took care of their home. Now the home takes care of Avery. That is bomb.
it's really, really good.
That's a really, really good outline. So, things that are great about it. I mean, it starts off strong, right? Like, we get introduced right away to the characters and the situation, the fact that there's something seriously wrong with the house. And we also sort of ramp up the tension pretty fast, right? So Sylvester disappears. Maybe there's a squatter in the house. These very upsetting dreams. And dreams are a really cool addition, I think, because dreams are not technically happening, right? But they still escalate the tension. And that's something you often see in horror, I think, right? Like stuff that is happening even just inside the character's mind can escalate tension even if it's not stuff that's happening in real life. So I think that was a really good touch, and I think it makes total sense for it to have made it into the outline. I think that's great. The rope is a snake. That's great. That's a brilliant way, honestly, I think, of showing that the house is alive, right? The speeding up the security footage, and then you see the walls. I mean, I wish I'd thought of that. That's fantastic. Good on you. So where I think that, so, you know, because this is in the context of a workshop and we did say we would give feedback, I think that something that I would love to see workshopped a little bit is the climax and the conclusion, because we get some really good stuff in the climax, right? The going into the basement, the flesh tunnel. It's horrible. That's all really good stuff. But then we get to binges home repair YouTube videos in a dissociative blur, which is interesting. I think it would be tricky to make that a really tense, dramatic, action-packed climax, in my opinion, or at least I would struggle with it.
Right.
And maybe there is a way to do it. I think off the top of my head, I would say maybe that could be looked at. And one way that I think maybe it could be addressed is in the conclusion, I see this really fantastic thing, which is Avery took care of their home. Now the home takes care of Avery. And that makes me think, working backwards from there, that maybe there's room for, Avery to get injured or hurt in some way, whether physically or psychologically, during the climax, because then that really would lead us into the home taking care of Avery, which is, I think, a fantastic twist at the end. Mm-hmm. And I think that, as we discussed in the previous workshop, that is a really good way to address the problem, address the conflict.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I can see the people who wrote this are now in the document with me and have just added climax needs more climax juice. So love that you're paying attention. So honestly, great job.
Yeah, absolutely. Phenomenal.
And I don't know how it worked with you all putting this together as a group, but whatever you did, I think you did a fantastic job. So thank you so much for submitting it.
You done did it. Congratulations. Should we get to our business for today? Let us. We're good? Yep. I'm going to see if I can hold both of these. This is strange. Give me just a second and I'll switch us over to what we're talking about today. I hope this is on the right screen. It is. We did it. Okay.
Love that for us.
So like I said before, this thing has had like a billion titles because there are a lot of different things that we basically wanted to address a lot of the questions that we were getting in the Discord when we went in there and saw people's requests. Keep sending those in. That was super, super useful for us. And it's just really fun to watch all of you in there actually doing the thing, actually working together and writing.
Yeah.
It definitely made me feel a lot better throughout the week, just seeing people working together. It was really nice. But a lot of what we saw was about writing good action scenes, writing good suspense. I think I saw one thing about writing monsters. And so what we wanted to talk about is sort of our process, and a process that we've noticed works in a lot of stories for that. So first we're going to go over like the mechanics of an action scene in very, very, very broad terms. We can maybe go more in depth on another Saturday. But then we want to talk about something that you actually need to think about before you think about what is happening during your climax, which is what is happening for your characters. That's why we're calling this one Stacking the Deck, how to set your characters up for thrilling action and suspense. So let's talk about it. Sophie, you ready to talk about it?
Yes, but like I can only pop in when you decide to hand me the mic. So
okay, well,
we'll have to do it interview style.
if I just keep doing this, will that work?
Yeah, we love that.
All right. Okay. Let's. Did my mic turn off? Did my mouse turn off? Come on, bud. There we go. So mechanics of strong action. A lot of people ask just how to put together an action scene. The very, very fast version is that it works basically the same as the plot arc that we discussed last week, just on a smaller scale. We said last week, very briefly, that the plot arc structure also works for a chapter, for a scene, for an entire series. It works whether you scale down or scale up. So within an action scene, thinking about it the same way of, we're presented with a threat. It is the person that we are fighting or the force that we are fighting. A plan, we come up with a plan. We're going to punch the person one way. The rope is a snake. It turns out that the person loves punches, and so that doesn't work. And then we develop from there.
That does happen in our show.
It does happen in our show. That's true. So it's just about kind of continuing those steps 2 and 3 for as long as you think you can keep the audience's attention, and so for as long as you think you can keep it tense, right? Great fight scenes in movies feature tons of like turning the table where it looks like one person's going to win, then it looks like the other person's going to win. That's really just the rope is a snake over and over and over and over again. And then eventually it gets to the big climax of your fight, which is a little bit what we're going to talk about today. So if you have any other questions about fight scenes, you want to put them in the Discord, we can get back to that later. I also want to talk about suspense, because I think this is really interesting. So the mechanics of strong suspense, the mathematical equation, if you hate math, avert your eyes, is suspense equals knowledge of threat plus time. You need both. So there's a very famous example that Alfred Hitchcock said that I'm going to butcher right now, and I'm going to tell it a totally different way so that it comes out as a story and not a suggestion. But I want you to imagine that you're watching a movie of some people playing poker, as I've handily demonstrated for you in that picture there. Imagine you're watching a movie of some people playing poker. The movie is half an hour long, and at the end of the movie, suddenly the poker table explodes. Is that suspense?
No.
It's just surprise.
It's just a thing happened.
Right. And in Hitchcock's words, you're surprised for about 15 seconds in that case, right? Now extend that movie by 10 seconds at the beginning of it. We're only adding 10 seconds. And in that 10 seconds, you see someone sneak into the room before the poker game, put a time bomb under the table, and set it for, let's say, 1 o'clock. Then in the background of the poker game, make sure that there is a clock with the time visible the whole time, right? Now, instead of 15 seconds of surprise, what do we get?
A whole lot of suspense.
Yeah,
now it's really stressful for half an hour.
Literally exactly the same poker game, and we're freaking out, right? It's just knowledge of threat plus time. Give the audience something to worry about, then really just make them sit in it. You gotta enjoy that part a little bit, which I think a lot of you know we do.
We do.
So those are the basic mechanics. That was super fast, I know, but there's something that I think we need to talk about before we even get into that in more detail, which is how do you decide what the action or suspense should be about, right? Like, how do you get the idea in the first place? Sophie, how do you get the idea in the first place?
How do I?
Yeah, sure. How do you get the idea in the first place?
I don't know what you're trying to feed me, honestly.
I was just curious what you were going to say.
No, I got nothing.
Okay, that's fine. We're going to talk you through an example. This is an episode of the Twilight Zone called Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. If you have not seen it, you should go see it. If you have Netflix streaming, it's on there. It's season 5, episode something. And it's a good little short
It's a banger.
tale. It's a banger. We're going to spoil the entire thing for you right now, but it's still really good. So this face is Bob. That's our main character here. He's played by a very young William Shatner. And Bob has some problems. He recently had a nervous breakdown on a plane. He went into psychiatric care away from his family for months. And now he's cured and he's returning home. I have a question for you all. And specifically, I would really like people who have not seen this episode to respond to this.
So we're looking for responses for you to put in the live channel.
Yes, that'd be great. Our question is, what form of transportation is Bob taking to return home?
Based on the information we've just told you.
Based on the information we've just told you, what form of transportation is Bob taking to return home? We'll wait for your answers for just
So even if you haven't, well, especially if you haven't seen this episode, that's who we're looking for to respond. And we have already given you the information that you need to figure it out.
A couple people already got it. That is wonderful. And we got some people messing with us. Yes, it is a plane, right?
Yes, the first several people all said a plane.
Right. It absolutely has to be a plane for the story to work. So I think that just keep that in the back of your mind. The fact that we were able to identify that, or you were able to identify that without ever having seen the episode, right? Because we're going to come back to that in a little bit. Here's a twist. This is the gremlin.
It's me.
It's Sophie. Sophie's earliest acting role was decades before she was born. So throughout the episode, Bob sees this gremlin standing on the wing of the plane mid-flight. It's tampering with the engine, but every time Bob tries to get someone else to come see the gremlin, it flies away. The Twilight Zone's special effects budget was about the same as your lunch budget, so it looks just as silly as you'd hope. And every time Bob calls someone over to say there's someone out on the wing of the plane, this is the face that people make kind of over and over and over again.
That was me, the gremlin disappearing.
That was you, the gremlin disappearing.
Like this.
It's a little bit like that. Yeah, it's like if Sophie had had wires under their armpits pulling them away, that'd be kind of what we're looking at.
No, I can fly.
Oh, that's great. So let's talk about character arc versus plot arc, because the basic main theory that we want to pose to you is that when you're trying to come up with the climax of your story, it actually really helps to think about where your character is coming from first and tying the conflict of your story up in your character's arc as well, right? So a character arc is basically the change a character goes through over the course of a story as a result of their internal or personal conflict. And the plot arc is the build up and release of tension over the course of a story as a result of the plot's central conflict, right? I'd say in the vast majority of cases, these two are not exactly the same, but they are connected. And we're going to talk about that connection today. If we're talking about Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, from the story I just told you, we can tell that Bob's internal conflict is he's afraid of having another mental breakdown on a plane. Relatable. The central plot conflict is a monster's on the wing of the plane threatening to kill everyone on board, and the monster ensures that only Bob can see it. What do you think about that, Sophie? So, they're gone. They plead the fifth. So the big thing is that if you connect this character arc over here with the central plot conflict, you can see that the gremlin is Bob's monster, nobody else's. This story only works with Bob as the protagonist and the gremlin as the antagonist.
And it really elevates it from being just a straight up monster story to a story that is gripping and it's upsetting for his sake, because if all of that background about his character wasn't there, it would just be, oh no, there's a Yeti on the wing of the plane.
Right.
But we're really worried about him and his psyche because we know about his character.
Right, exactly. We're kind of stepping into Bob's personal nightmare. And one thing that I want you to think about as we keep going through this is that in some ways you are always creating your character's personal nightmare. It sort of depends on how intense you want to get about it. But that's kind of what you're creating. So in the climax, everything has to come to a head. Last week we talked about stakes. In this episode, these are the stakes we've established so far, right? The lives of everyone aboard the airplane are at stake. And Bob's worries that people will think he's crazy. So Bob's sanity or perceived sanity is at stake. So what I'd like to do now...
And just a note to keep going with what I was saying is that I would argue that us worrying about whether people will think Bob is crazy is more upsetting to us than the lives of everyone on the plane. And that reminds me a little bit about what we talked about last week about, okay, you might have technically bigger stakes like the tidal wave, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's the most compelling.
Right.
Smaller can be more compelling.
Right.
And often is.
That's a really good point. It's smaller and more personal because ultimately it's true that probably the lives of everyone on the plane are more important, but we've gotten attached to Bob by this point. We're in his head, or we're very close to his head anyway. So here's my question for you. So I want you all to respond in the Discord with what the climax for this story should be. If you were writing the story, what would the climax be? Remember that both of these stakes, Bob's perceived sanity and the lives of everyone on board the airplane, need to be at significant risk at the same time. You need to tie them together in order to make that happen. So as you come up with ideas,
we're gonna vamp.
We're just gonna rap a little bit.
I was gonna say something. This isn't necessarily related, but I was just thinking about like making it a character's personal nightmare, and like sometimes that can a good place to go with that is like your own personal nightmare.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And in fact, like thinking back, this isn't going to be one of the examples that we go over today, but for those of you who have listened to the episode Shaken, I know that's where that came from for me. It was like a personal nightmare about if you are an artist of some kind and something happens to you where you can't make your art.
Right. Yeah, and so I think that kind of figuring out how you relate to the personal conflicts that you know what it is that you're writing about can be really helpful.
Okay, so we got lots of responses.
All right.
Oh my gosh, here they come. Yeah, Bob's gonna try to save the plane. Bob crashes the plane. The gremlin starts to open the door and come in the plane.
Definitely can hear you.
Well, I was kind of reading it too.
Oh, okay. All right, we have some really good ones and a lot of very different endings for this, right? Sophie just pointed out He tries to go out and stop it himself because he knows no one will believe him, and then they see it.
That's from Danny.
That's from Danny. We had some good ones about Bob purposely crashes the plane to destroy the gremlin. Bob causes the crash by stopping it. That's from Koshek. Nice. These are all really good at tying together both the concern that, Bob feels that he might be going insane and that you actually have a monster out there, right? In a second, unless you see any others that you really want to call out. So,
No.
Okay. We're going to tell you how the episode ends. Sorry. But it's very similar to some of the answers that you had. Basically, the episode solution is that Bobby, wow.
He could be.
Good old Bobby.
He could be Bobby.
Bobby does a series of actions that seem completely insane. So up at this top left image, he's pretending to take a sleeping pill, but then throwing it away. Over here, he's stealing a gun from a cop.
That part is so nuts.
That part is wild watching it now. In fact, one reason this episode is kind of interesting is just to see what airplane travel used to be like. Everybody's dressed to the nines, and there is just an actual police officer with a loaded gun. Then he opens the emergency exit right next to his seat, and then he nearly falls out of the plane trying to shoot the monster. Everybody in the end thinks that he is completely nuts, but he saves everyone on board the plane. The final direction that the episode goes is kind of interesting, but that's more about conclusions, so we're not going to talk about it too much today.
You'll have to watch it.
You'll have to watch it, exactly. But those of you who suggested that other people find out about the monster somehow, it toes that line in an interesting way. So you should go watch it.
Yeah. And one of the reasons that this episode was top of mind for us is not going to spoil anything if you all are not caught up on the latest arc of the Penumbra. But if you have listened to it, or if you're going to listen to it, again, I won't spoil anything, but having talked through this example, it might be very easy for you to reverse engineer how we came up with the arc of that set of episodes, Juno Steel and the Shadows on the Ship, because it is very much inspired by this episode, and there is a specific reason for that, and it has to do with character conflict.
Right. The nature of the monster is determined by the situation, the conflict that the character is going through.
Yeah.
Right?
So if you have listened, or if you're planning to listen, that might be an interesting thing to try and work out what our thought process was. You'll probably be able to figure it out based on what we've said today.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Sophie, you wanted to talk about another example from our show in a little more
Yes.
detail.
So this one I'll actually get into. This is so crazy with the two mics. Also, I just turned one of them off, but I think I turned it back on again. So it's like a bouquet. I love that.
You gonna get into flower arranging?
No. Okay, so I wanted to talk about an example where we happen to know exactly what the creative process was, and we can tell you a little bit about it. Which is our Penumbra episode, Second Citadel, the head of the Janus Beast. And maybe you have listened to it. It's possible not everybody has. That's fine. I think we'll probably give you enough information to talk through it. So this is one that I wanted to talk about because it changed significantly through the drafting process. And the manner in which it changed significantly is the nature of the monster. And we had to make it suit the character conflict better. So it's actually a very good example of what we're talking about today. So one of the characters that we were working with was the character of Sir Mark, who his conflict in this episode is that he wants to become a knight. So he needs to kill the most epic monster and bring its head to the queen. That's what he's decided is going to get him a knighthood. You will notice I haven't really addressed the character of Tal. If you've listened to the episode, that's because his character arc is not really the main one of this episode. It's relevant, but we won't really talk about it here. However, we have another character whose conflict we need to look at, which is Sir Caroline. And she's already a knight, but she wants to be taken seriously as a female knight. So she needs to kill the most epic monster and bring its head to the queen. So they have the same goal. which of course is going to bring them into conflict. So what kind of monster should the knights battle? Well, in our first draft, we weren't really thinking so much in terms of character conflict. So in our first draft, there was a bear and also some more bears.
When you say it that way, it sounds pretty dumb.
Yeah, which is why I said it that way. But in fairness, it was not actually that dumb. It just didn't end up working.
No, it was that dumb. you can kick me for that one. It's not great.
Okay, so why is it that bears didn't work? So on this page, I put a little portion of that original script, which I just dug out, and it was kind of a trip to look back at an early draft that never made it in.
I don't remember any of this.
Yeah, so we've got the bear mother, which was our monster. And so, I mean, you can read that little segment of the script. It's not really that important. We can skip to the next slide, which is more important. So this next slide is a section of dialogue from right after the big fight scene with the bear mother. And so what ends up happening is that Mark and Sir Caroline both fight the bear mother, and they both stab it, and it dies. And so both of them claim that they've defeated the monster and that they're entitled to take its head back to the queen. But there's sort of no way to prove it. So like what we had happen is that Tal, takes a look at the wounds and he says, "Oh, you both legitimately stabbed it." And then we kind of looked at that draft and we were like, well, that doesn't really work because why would Caroline take Tal's word for it? I mean,
Right.
He's Mark's brother. Like, he'd be on his side. She would never accept that. That doesn't make any sense. And also, like, why a bear? So we decided we needed to rework the monster to make it suit the characters better. And it needed to suit their particular conflicts better. So remember, we already talked about their conflicts. So what we needed is a monster that two people could both be fighting, one on each side, and each legitimately think they were defeating, right? Because what we needed is both of their conflicts are about killing the most epic monster. They've found the most epic monster. And then we needed them to be in conflict with each other because they both legitimately thought they defeated it and were entitled to its head. So why not a two-faced reversible monster? And that idea literally came out of this is kind of how I personally work, is reverse engineering things.
Yeah.
I think Kevin is much better at just generating ideas from scratch, and I'm much better at saying, okay, we already are working with this, what are our needs?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that.
So that's where that monster came from, is just literally from addressing the needs of this particular conflict. And so we can also talk a little bit about other things that other details that we added to this monster,
right,
to make it suit.
Right, because those of you that have seen the episode know that the Janus Beast, along with being totally reversible, a face on each side of its head, its arms can totally move backwards. It can also like read your thoughts to talk about your insecurities.
Right, so it taunts people with their deepest fears and insecurities, which is a very helpful way to find out more about characters' deepest fears and insecurities.
Right.
Which is something that you really want to do with your characters.
Right. That power was basically totally out of necessity, as we were realizing we're introducing these characters out of nowhere. We need it to be said what it is they're dealing with, but having another long conversation of I'm scared of this is kind of lame. Right? It just gets boring after a while.
And then another thing about the monster, which I guess if you haven't listened to it and you want to, put on earmuffs for a second. But we also needed there to be a second fight. Mm-hmm. So in the original draft, the second fight for episode 2 was the bear mother's 3 children. Mm-hmm. But for this version, we needed there to be a second fight, which is why, as it turns out, the Janus Beast isn't killed by its head being cut off.
Right.
And that part of the monster design, right, the fact that it doesn't die when you chop it up, that, again, came right out of necessity.
Right. Thank you. That example kind of shows our process in doing this. I want to take a step back and talk about this in broader terms so that you can kind of grab hold of these concepts and use them how you want to. In general, whenever we talk about this stuff, remember that basically what we can do most effectively is to describe to you what has worked for us. And probably the most consistent rule between writers or creators of any kind is that the same thing's not going to work for everybody. So we're explaining why our system works for us, but you may find that kind of taking some of these ideas and reorganizing them in your own way might be more helpful for you.
Yeah, do whatever you want. Like, the only thing we are qualified to tell you about is what we do. So we hope it works for you. But if it doesn't, just take elements that you like and ditch the rest.
Right. The only rule that we can offer is do what works, right? That's the only rule that matters. But some concepts to talk about, right? This is a question that gets thrown around a lot that is related to what we've said about building a conflict and a climax that are perfect for your character, which is, do I write character first or plot first? People debate about this a lot.
I think your mic is bad again, I'm hearing.
Both my mics are bad?
Yikes.
Mic check, 1, 2, 1, 2.
Are they both on?
They're both on.
We don't have a third one.
How we doing? My readout says it's okay. It also says that our stream health is okay. That is bizarre.
Huh. Some people are saying they can hear it, so maybe it will come back. I would say... Okay, it says it's back. So
Came back?
Why don't you back up a little bit?
All right. So what we were basically saying is, do what works for you, right? We will talk to you about how we've done these things, but also we want to be able to take a step back and kind of give you the broad concepts so that you can understand how they work, so that you can kind of take them and use them as you need them, right? So this question, do I write character first or plot first, is related to what we're saying about building a climax or an action scene or a suspense scene or whatever that is perfect for your characters. Because this is a debate that you see around a little bit in terms of writing process. If you're writing character first, you're sort of aiming to develop interesting and three-dimensional characters, then consistently following what you think the characters would actually do, right? You're constantly asking yourself, if this were a real person, what would they do? Plot first is you come up with a series of events with an eye on managing tension, the story's central mysteries, or conflicts, or anything like that, and then find ways to justify your character doing these things. There are pros and cons to each, right? Character first can be a little bit unwieldy. A lot of people, even a lot of really interesting people, when given a choice, will decide to do nothing. They'll just kind of sit there. Plot first can feel contrived, right? So in response to those, I think that the best method for us is ¿Por qué no lo estés?
We literally say this all the time, also.
That's true.
That's why you put that in this.
This is something that I call stacking the deck. Remember that you have full control over what happens to your characters. You can still realistically follow exactly what you think they do and keep the outline you've created if ahead of time you set up a situation built specifically for them, right? Stacking the deck is a term in like card games and gambling for basically setting up the deck so that you always win, right? Deciding the order of the cards ahead of time. So you can still have your totally organic reactions by your characters so long as you stack the deck of the situation. You make it so that the situation that they bump into is going to create the response that you want from them, right? Anything you want to add about that?
No, I love that.
All right, here we go. We're going to make some monsters.
Monsters!
We're going to do a couple different practice exercises. One is on making monsters, and the other one is a mystery for now. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to put up a character who has a problem, and I would like people in our Discord to talk about what would be the perfect monster for this character in a story, right? Design an actual monster for them. Our first one's going to be real simple. Michael's afraid of the dark.
Okay, so again, we want you to be in the Discord in the live channel, and we're looking for suggestions of a type of monster for Michael to encounter, specifically built around the fact that he is afraid of the dark.
Right.
And we're looking for literal monsters, right?
Literal monsters.
Literal monsters.
We're looking for the perfect monster for Michael.
Make me a monster.
Monster maker.
Make me a monster. Oh, that was embarrassing.
Oh, we got a bunch of people typing. Oh, I really like the very first one we got, actually. Blanket monster.
That's from Hypnold?
From Hypnold. What I like about that is, what's Michael going to do when he's afraid of the dark? He's going to hide underneath the blanket.
That's brilliant.
That's devious. That's wonderful. I love that.
Oh my gosh. We have a couple people. Almond says Shadow Monster. So does Holly Not Holly says Shadow Monster. I do love a Shadow Monster.
We do love a shadow monster.
Yeah, love that. Faintly Macabre says shape-shifting creature of sentient darkness.
Ooh, Box of Many Tiny Bears
This is a
says
good one.
it can melt plastic and glass and it affects light bulbs.
That's really good.
Right. A monster that's specifically geared for Michael's fears, right?
Similarly, Ali says eats electricity.
Nice.
Good
Excellent. This one's a little bit more complicated, but again, I want you to make a monster for this person. It has been 10 years since Sandra visited home. She left after a huge fight with her father. Now she's returning for her father's funeral. A lot more complicated. I said a little more complicated.
Yeah. So like, there's probably a lot of. I mean, honestly, I'm already surprised with the Michael one. I'm already surprised at all the different directions that people went in.
Yeah.
So for this one, I think it'll probably be even more all over the place, which is great because it means that like different writers can start from the same seed and write completely different stories, and it can work really, really well.
Mm-hmm.
So, 10 years since Sandra visited home, she left after a huge fight with her father. Now she's returning for her father's funeral. So, what is Sandra's monster?
We've got some good. We've got some good ones, and also a bunch of answers that came in at the same time are all thinking along the same lines, which is very interesting.
This one is really sad.
Box of Many Tiny Bears again. You're killing it. It takes the form of her father and stands just out of her view.
That's sad.
Yeah,
That's really good.
That's rough. Seeing a lot of shapeshifters, a lot of father monsters. Let me see. Let's see if we can get one more. Fox says a monster that stands at the foot of her bed and looks like her father, but all wrong. All he does is stand stock still and smile. Oh, Almond says photos that move and whisper. Not him, but the memories of him. These are excellent. These are all really good.
Yeah, and they're all super different.
Right. So we've created the kind of perfect monster for Sandra, and then you can ask similar questions about when Sandra confronts the monster during the conflict, how is she going to have to take it down, right? It needs to be somehow relevant to her father's memory or to the argument they had or something like that, right? Here's our second exercise. We're going to make monsters minus monsters. There's a concept in horror that basically says if you take the monster out of a monster movie, you figure out what the actual fear that's happening is, right? Frankenstein's a great example of that. Frankenstein is about a giant, drippy, undead man. But it is also about the horrors of science, right? The fact that like the main character, Victor Frankenstein, is horrified with himself for what he's done, right? He's not proud of himself for making the monster. But he's so consumed by curiosity, he does it anyway. What I want to do is we're going to look at those exact same two characters we just did. Now I want you to come up with the perfect conflict for that character, and this time it can't include a monster, all right? We're looking for a conflict that's relevant to what the character is going through, something that they have to do despite what they're going through, that is also perfectly related to what they are going through.
So a metaphorical monster.
Metaphorical monster.
If you will.
Weren't we the monsters?
All along. So we're going back to that first example. Michael is afraid of the dark. but it's going to be not a literal monster this time, but a conflict designed for the character, a metaphorical monster.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so excited. People are like on fire.
Yeah, for real. I'm sad that we can only read some of the answers as they come up because they're all really, really good.
Yeah.
Definitely worth your time to go back through the live channel and the Discord when this is through.
Oh God. Oh, it's the same.
Oh, we have. Sophie's scrolling very quickly.
Sorry.
That's okay. Caravan of Crows says a situation that requires him to shelter in darkness to remain safe.
That's good. I mean, I'd like more specificity, but that's a great idea.
Right. There's another bigger central conflict going on, but the thing that we are ultimately invested in is that Michael's scared out of his mind.
Yeah.
Right?
That's fantastic. Someone did a throwback to last week.
Let's give Verona a break. She had a big day.
I like that.
Liv says the power is out and he's home alone with his little sister who's even more scared. Right?
That's very grounded.
Mm-hmm.
Totally realistic, like nothing spooky, but that hurts.
Right, exactly. That's a small personal conflict that in a lot of ways hits a lot harder than the universe is in danger, right? Let's see if we can get one more.
I think that could go in a really interesting direction.
Laura D or Lorad says Michael gets a job, but it's the night shift.
I think that could go somewhere really interesting with a character who really, really needs a job.
Mm-hmm.
There's probably some other stakes built into that.
Right.
You know, and this is the only job he can get.
And there are a million ways that you can take it for like what kind of job you're thinking about, how much of a focus you want the central conflict to be. Does Michael take a job as a security guard at a museum that's getting robbed, and then the thing that we're thinking about is the robbery, but Michael's dealing with the fear of the dark? There are a lot of different ways that you can take that.
Yeah.
Right?
Ooh, there's one more that I like from Holly Not Holly. Something really awful happened to him in the dark, and he's not slept with the lights out ever since. His new partner can't sleep with the light on. I like that. It's a very different kind of conflict than the other ones we've talked about. It becomes like a relationship drama.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that sets up conflict really, really well.
Absolutely. Now we're back to Sandra. It's been 10 years since Sandra visited home. She left after a huge fight with her father. Now she's returning for her father's funeral. We're looking for a conflict that is perfect for Sandra in this circumstance that does not include a monster this time. To kind of give you some background, the reason that we started with monsters is because I've found in my own practice it tends to be easiest to start with something really big and over the top to try to imagine it that way.
Oh, do you like really big and over the top?
Leave me alone.
Never. You're stuck here with me. It's Kevin's nightmare.
Save me. Somebody help me. Tell me about Sandra. Zesty says Sandra has to help pack up his possessions and find something that ties back to their fight and makes her reconsider her position in the initial fight. I like that a lot. There's like a lot of internal like growth and pain there.
Oh my god.
Ooh, Janik Jess says Sandra's mom blames her. That is tough.
That's dark.
That's dark, and it's a really good one.
I think that was interesting.
Caravan of Crows says younger sister has been torn between her sister and her father this whole time and blows up in Sandra's face about it.
Oh, I like this. Cameron says she's asked to speak about her last memory with him.
Nice. All right.
That's really good.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's also kind of, that's maybe a bit smaller scale. That seems like limited to a small time frame, which I also like. Like, that's not a big sprawling story. That's a sort of countdown to like the eulogy or something.
Right.
Really good.
This whole thing takes place in a couple of days. I like that a lot. So this is the kind of process that we go through. And remember what we talked about with Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. This also helps you to create, if you want action, you can make it, right? in a situation with Sandra, the action probably centers around her family, around her father. Now you have a concept. You can then figure out the scene in a smaller way when you get there, right? That is what we have to say for today, really. Our assignment for you this week, you're stuck at home, so you might as well do this work. I don't know what the problem is.
Honestly, I love it. Like, it's really growing on me.
Two things we're gonna ask you to do. Continue the exercise we just did with your group. Someone pitches a character with a personal problem, then the group discusses a fitting central conflict for that character. What would be a thing the character has to do in the story that is related to what's going on for them? You can stick with monsters if your group's interested in that. You can open it up a bit more if your group's interested in that, right? And then plan and or write a short story in which you stack the deck so that personal and central conflict come to a climax at the same time and share it with your group. You get to decide how much you're up for. I think that it sort of depends on where you're at. A couple pages in a week is probably fine, but some of us write very fast, some of us don't. It's just how it is. Neither way is better. So talk to your group about what expectations you'd like to set, and then you can share with each other by the end of the week.
If they were inspired by one of these example ones, can they do that?
I think that's fair. I think that's absolutely fair. So yeah, if you're inspired by an example, you can take that. And I think now it's time for general questions. We have about 10 minutes for questions today.
So we're in the Discord live channel again, if you have questions from today. So we will wait for some.
If you have questions, all right.
We should vamp.
We should vamp.
But also look at the chat.
Vamp and chat.
All right, I know people are typing.
How you doing, Sophie?
I'm good.
Yeah?
A little chilly and a little sweaty.
Oh, that's a bad combo.
Yeah, that's often my... Can do that one.
Ace asks, how do you decide whether to do a real monster or a quote-unquote monster? Can you do both? What do you think, Soph?
Of course you can do both. I think we often do both.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those are my favorites.
Yeah.
Really. In the same way as the example as in the Twilight Zone episode, right? It's both in that one. It's a literal, there's something on the wing of the plane, but also it's a metaphorical monster. You know, people will think he's gone insane again.
Right.
It's
Exactly.
both. Definitely do it if you have the option.
Let's see. See any that you're interested in?
I'm interested in this. I'm not sure exactly how to address it. Well, I don't know. Let's talk it through. So Han says, how do you avoid veering into overused tropes, especially with making monsters? I mean, I guess one thing I want to say off the bat is I feel like sometimes people talk about tropes like it's an inherent bad thing. And a lot of them are just things you see in stories a bunch, and that's totally fine. And a lot of times those really resonate because when we see them, they carry the emotional weight of every other time we've seen that in a story, and that's why they can work really well. So just off the bat, I do want to say a trope is not inherently a bad thing. It's possible that isn't actually what you meant. How do you avoid veering into overused tropes? Do we think about that?
Not really. I mean, I'd say that I think that the way that we talk about stories makes it so that people are most concerned about whether or not they're being original, but original's not really the most important thing. I'd say that authentic is more important.
Yeah, and like I'm sure that anything we've written, you could find a million examples that are extremely similar that exist.
I've said multiple times that like several of our episodes are just me attempting to write the beginning of Dracula over and over again
Right.
and messing up. And ultimately, the reason that it never comes out exactly like the beginning of Dracula, like I want it to, is because I'm asking questions like this about our characters and going kind of where the characters need to go. That is what I'd probably define as authentic. More than being worried about if you're the first person to ever do something, worry about, does it make sense for these characters? Is it the right fit for these characters?
We sort of discussed this in the example, but maybe I don't know if there's anything more you want to say.
We have, do you have advice to people who might want to climax 2 character conflicts with 1 major conflict in the climax?
That's from Holly, not Holly.
Excellent. So I think that in the example that we gave in Janus Beast, one way that you can do it is you can have their conflicts be the same thing, right? Another thing that tends to be really useful, this is something that you see in really intense dramas, but it's also actually something that you see in a lot of comedies, is make it so that what 2 characters want, what is at stake for 2 characters, is contradictory. They cannot both get it. If you have that, then immediately the audience is concerned about like what's going to happen, right? The trouble with relying on too many 2-dimensional villains is that ultimately the audience knows the villain's going to lose. That's kind of how it shakes out, right? If you have 2 characters, the audience is rooting for both, and only one of them can win. That's a lot harder, right?
This one is interesting to me. Can I have mics, please?
Yeah.
Robin K says, I have the characters, the conflict, the ending, but not the climax of the story, so the most important part is missing. How do I come up with it? I'm super stuck. Any exercises or tips to get your brain moving? So, okay. I think that what I'm about to say is probably, I don't know, controversial, but like, for me, I would say, like, from my experience, sometimes the problem actually is that I already have the ending. Mm-hmm. That I like, if you have the characters and the conflict and the ending, you're really like hamstringing yourself because you're like, oh my God, I know I have to get to this specific place, and any method of getting there is kind of going to feel shoehorned in. It's going to feel forced. And I hate to say it, but I almost want to advise you to put that ending idea aside. Mm-hmm. Like, not necessarily throw it away. Maybe you'll end up using it, but like, I feel like you're going to mire yourself deeper by insisting that this is the ending you have to have without just seeing what comes out of the characters of the conflict, which will lead you to your climax, and then you can see about the ending from there. Remember when we went through our 5-point outline, each point kind of came from the previous point, mm-hmm. you know? So personally, I think my advice would be take your potential ending, put it aside for now, and then see what you can do, because I think it might be holding you back. I don't know if you have different advice.
I mean, just kind of adding the same thing, just from a personal, like, having done this before perspective. To date, one of the hardest episodes... Our mics are really quiet suddenly. There we go. To date, one of the hardest episodes to write for me was actually our rewrite of our first story, of Murderous Mask. And it was because, in order for everything that followed it to still be canon, I needed to make it so that the episode ended the same way, even though we wanted to change a bunch of stuff in the middle. That is really, really hard. At that point, your story stops being asking yourself what's happening, and it becomes algebra as you're trying to like insert your variable and figure out what is going to make it so that the equation works out.
Yeah, I don't recommend that. It was upsetting.
It was bad. I like our remake a lot, and I would never do that again. Smash cut 2.
I know I'm hearing from people that the mics are going in and out, so I don't know. We'll keep trying to project, and hopefully it will come back. There was one that I thought was interesting.
Jack Frost asks, how do you decide when you're done with a monster, like when it's time for it to be defeated? It's a good question. I think that there are a couple different answers to that, right? I think that if you're thinking about one story, like if you take Nightmare at 20,000 Feet as an example, a lot of it is just when the thing that the monster is about has been addressed and kind of conquered, right? the whole time Bob is worried that people are going to think he's crazy. At the end, he kind of takes control of that by doing a series of the most crazy looking things a person can do for a greater purpose, right?
I think another thing that we actually haven't discussed today, and we don't really have time to, but something that is helpful to keep in mind is what's the monsters conflict?
Right, that's true.
Like, what's the monsters arc? And this won't always apply, right? Sometimes it's not a literal character, sometimes it's not a literal monster, and sometimes it isn't. But you know what? Like, even if it's not like sentient, like even if you look at like a really basic schlocky horror movie and it's not a sentient monster, like it generally has some kind of purpose or goal, right? So I think that something that will probably help you out a lot as far as the monster end of things is like, what does the monster want, and when will it have achieved its goals, and how can it be defeated, and sort of treat it like its own character.
Yeah,
and that might help.
Absolutely. I think we have time for like maybe one more.
It's a good question. I don't know that I have a great answer, but it's a good question.
Al the NB Nerd asks how to avoid Deus Ex Machina. I guess in my experience, Deus Ex Machina, for those of you that aren't familiar with the term, it's basically like the day is saved, or the climax is resolved as a result as something that feels like it comes totally out of nowhere.
And
right?
I think it comes from ancient Greek theater.
Yeah.
It was like God would literally just like come in
Yeah.
from the sky and like solve everything.
Exactly. So very often when an ending feels contrived in that way, a lot of what I end up looking at is basically how's the outline looking, right? A lot of the time that just means that the outline was too strict, or it asked us to do something that doesn't make sense for the characters. So a lot of the time to fix Deus Ex Machina, the thing that you really need to do, yeah, I'm seeing that it got quiet on the reading. I'm trying to bring it up. Yeah. All right, I'll give it. All right, looks like we're back a little bit. I'll give this the best shot I have. So a lot of the time I find that the issue with Deus Ex Machina is basically that you haven't set it up right. The problem is not actually in the moment; it's before the moment.
Oh,
right?
that's a good tip.
So ultimately, if your problem is that a character is acting in a way that makes no sense, you need to set up the situation so that it makes sense for the character to do that, right? That work needs to happen earlier. If it feels like something comes out of nowhere, right? A building suddenly falls over and crushes the monster, and we have no reason why. Earlier, you had better give us hints about it, right? In previous scenes when we're walking by the building, we're seeing demolition crews or something like that, right? This is another form of stacking the deck, because you need to set it up ahead of time so that when this thing that felt like it was coming out of nowhere doesn't feel like it's coming out of nowhere. It feels like we saw it coming.
Yep. Did you want to do any more, or do you need to do it?
I think that's about our time, unless you see any that you're interested in.
Yeah, I see one that I want to answer just because I feel like I can answer it really fast, which is from Evie. How do you make it so that the hero could believably lose while still setting them up for success? I feel like the easiest thing, which we may have talked about last time, is like give them something they're really good at, setting them up for success, and give them something holding them back. Some kind of handicap. I think pretty much all of our characters have both of those things.
Yeah.
And that makes interesting people, that creates conflict, and that makes it so that they could believably lose. And then you can build that, believable lose situation around their handicap in the way that we are talking about building the monster around their conflict. It's kind of the same.
Yeah, it's very similar. Unfortunately, let me bring us back to our other view for just a second. Unfortunately, I think that's our time for today. Sorry for the tech issues, everybody. We will work on it as best we can.
We
for next
cannot
week.
promise it will be better next time, but we will try.
We are doing everything we can with a very bad internet connection. So thank you all for coming. Thank you so much. If you aren't in the Discord already, jump on in. There's a link in the description for this stream and this video when it becomes a video. And people are having a really good time in there, like making groups and joining up.
Yeah, and I've been checking in every so often. I think Kevin has too. It's
Yeah.
really nice to see. Love that you guys are doing the group work. Make sure you do the thing for next week.
Yeah.
We're really excited to see what you come up with. And again, we'll pick something out of the submission channel.
Excellent. Then I think that's it. So thank you, everybody. And we'll see you next Saturday at 2.
Bye.
Bye.